Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. Today, I wanted to talk to you about this idea of standards, and it's not ISO standards. It's much more about our personal standards that we hold ourselves to, and we also um, we hold other people to, and our organization to. But before we get into that, I wanted to do a bit of a proof testing, just to show that I like to show that my guests are human. And so I've got just some initial questions for you that
Oh
will
no, you didn't
hopefully.
send me this. Yeah. Or did you?
um,
Yeah.
Really, no, it's really simple. It's where were you born? Who did you grow up with, and who had the biggest influence in your life growing up, and who inspires you today?
Okay, where was I born? Manila. So spent most of my life here. Growing up mostly, yeah, pretty much Manila. I would say the single biggest influence would be my dad. It's kind of a, yeah, he's like, it's that kind of person, like really makes his mark felt. Very
Mm,
hardworking. Um, yeah, a lot of my quirks are like my dad's. The just waking up really early, working really late, disappearing in the middle of a meal to work, stuff like that. Um, he's also, I think a lot of the like more missional side of my work. He's always been like that, where he never chased the cash. It's like, no, I think this is a good mission. Let's do it, right? So I think that would be like the single biggest one. Of course, there've been other influences, but I guess if I had to pick like one major one, he's the obvious choice.
And
Um,
do you relate your standards to some of the standards that he had? And
yeah,
I mean, we're going to get into some of
either
that
I
stuff.
relate or I kind of like um, either like really like have adopted a lot of them, particularly like
Mm,
from a work standpoint, or kind of like challenge them. Like you're like we were like certain things that like another generation really values. Sometimes this generation or like my generation doesn't value, and my kids' generation is probably gonna switch it up or as well. Um,
yeah.
so so I think that's where um, I think it's basically because there was a very clear standard, like just to the topic, right? Is that yeah, you knew how to relate in a sense, like you knew how to interact, right? Like you didn't do this with my dad. It's like you knew you weren't gonna get away with it, and you could try and explain yourself and all that, and he'd be like, "What are you talking about?" It'd be like so
Yeah.
that was very clear. And when you're younger, you kind of resent it, right? You're like, "Oh, other people get away with stuff," and he was always like, "Well, that's not you, right? Or that's not me, or And so that was definitely there. Um, and the last question I think was who inspires me.
Yeah.
I think the
Uh,
I think now, and you can relate, right? Being a dad, with a young son, um, like every time I feel like bumming around,
mm,
I'll think about like him like begging in the streets, or and I'm just like, sheesh, man, like you gotta pick myself up. So
yeah.
definitely motivates me. Like the thought of let's say him or Yasmin like suffering just kind of
Yeah.
shakes me out of whatever like funk, particularly during COVID and all that, right? You're like, okay,
Yeah.
like that 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 scene in your head just kind of like uh gets you out of it. It's a good thing. I think it's been very good, you know.
For sure.
Um
And I think, I mean, relevant to this topic, isn't it? I mean, the idea of what drives and influences our standards. Yeah, I can certainly relate. Becoming a dad,
yeah,
um, it really makes you question where those standards and those disciplines are in your everyday life, and also just what influence are you going to have on what
your
standards he
child.
has,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, so let's get into it. I wanted to talk about standards. I think it's such a I guess it's more important now than ever, considering that we're a fair way into this global pandemic, and everybody's been thrown into some level of uncertainty or turmoil, whether it's on the, personal level, in relationships, business. And, I think standards as a topic has become so important in terms of being able to pick yourself up and push yourself through and persevere through challenging times. And so when we talk about, where do standards come from and just the importance of standards in your life as an individual, it's really quite an interesting topic. So I want to talk to you about standards. Where did your standards come from? What are your standards? And, how do they influence your everyday life?
No, when you told me about, like, you were thinking about this topic, I was thinking about it. So I was just kind of like throwing it to other people, like, what are your standards, right? And they're kind of looking at me like, what? What, particularly the younger people, they'd be like kind of defensive about it, like, what? Why are you asking? I guess I just realized that sometimes it's like we pick them up by default, from our parents, from our environment.
Yeah.
You see that a lot here, where, let's just say, you tell your employee, hey, I need you to be excellent. And to them, their idea of excellence is so far from your idea of excellence. And they're like, no, I've been trying my best. Right. And you're like, no, like, excellence isn't about the attempt necessarily. Excellence is about meeting a certain standard, a high standard, And so I think the first thing that I kind of thought about was like, wow, we kind of been picking it up by default, versus being very thoughtful and mindful about what's the standard that I should be living by, right? And then it reminded me, because we're kind of like going through planning now, right? We're going through planning like for next year. And one of the things that very timely, I've asked all the different, let's say, subsidiaries or subsidiary heads, or let's say the product teams, the dev teams. I've asked everyone this one question, which is, for what you do, what's the gold standard? And then so they'll come back to me with some sort of like sandbag, that's too, like a result that they know that they can hit, right? I go, no, that's not the gold standard for what you do. Okay, so if you're a developer, what's the gold standard of a developer? Is it full stack this? Is it a certain like mastery of let's say cybersecurity? Or if you are an accountant, what is the gold standard for an accountant? If you're into, we have a fintech company, if you do lending, what is the gold standard for, let's say, collection rates and stuff like that? And throughout that exercise, one of the things that people always go through in the middle of it is like, that's the standard. I agree, but that's too high for us, right? And then the story I've said, like, maybe I don't know how many times in the last couple of weeks, is like King Arthur's story in the Holy Grail. That story where all the knights basically start chasing the Holy Grail, right? And they go on a quest, and pretty much most of them don't ever achieve or see it or catch it, right? Or like I think there were like two guys, like Galahad and something else, right? But when you think about it, I've come to realize the point of that story is when you chase these holy grails, right? These big things, these things bigger than you, these standards higher than you. It's not always just that you attain it, but in the process of chasing it, you become a better person. You go on an adventure and you transform, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so important to be thoughtful about, and say, like, thoughtful about it, right? And be like, what is this adventure I'm going to go on, right? What is this standard I'm going to chase? Because you're going to kind of evolve and adapt and develop yourself towards that standard. And if you've never thought about it, then you can ask yourself, like, what am I evolving towards? Right? Some random human, or about the random events of life, right? So I think so that I thought that those are a few things that came to mind when you mentioned the topic. It's like, be mindful, right? Like, I need to be a bit more mindful about it and really pick out what's the gold standard for the different areas of my life.
Yeah.
And how do I kind of adapt my life towards those gold standards?
It's so circumstantial, isn't it? I mean, if you look at, if you look at the spectrum of success, or you look at the spectrum of fulfillment, and you look at the spectrum of really anything that is attainable. I mean, and you look at people that have attained massive success, whether it's Bill Gates or Michael Jordan. I always get really intrigued by the question of, well, what's the difference between them and me, or what's the difference between them and this guy sitting next to me, right?
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's extremely circumstantial, but it all comes back down to standards, not yes, in the environment, but it starts with yourself. It starts with the standards that you hold yourself to. But I think it's, it becomes relevant, and you're able to actually go introspective once you acknowledge and see that the realm of possibility is not out of reach. And that's something that's always really inspired me in my business ventures and just personal growth in general, is when you extend your realm of possibility and you see what is possible, it's not a question of if, it's a question of leveling up your standards and what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to commit? What bad habits are you willing to,
do away
kick
with?
out
Yeah.
of the way? And what new habits are you willing to, bring into your life? And also, what people are you willing to kind of get out of your life, and new people bring into your life? And it's really interesting because, when you look at that, and then you look at, again, going through this COVID situation, and you see kind of two types of people coming through this situation. You see people that are going on this downward spiral in a self-destructing, self-fulfilling prophecy. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you see people that are being inspired to innovate, and you're seeing people that are inspired to really dig into and hold some of those habits and those disciplines closer to them, now than they ever had before, to push them through all this. So I guess, one question, I guess, for you is like, what kind of habits do you have in your life? Because I think you're extremely qualified to talk about standards. Like, I've always looked at yourself as an individual where, standards for me is all about getting the most out of life, right? And living life to the fullest. And I look at yourself, and you've got such a vast array of success stories, both in the business arena, intellectually, creatively, at home with your family.
We're sending this video to my wife, right? And we're gonna record it, get her proud of me again.
Well, that's a
and
good
my
point.
mother. And my mother.
Because sometimes it is important to stop and actually be realistic about what you've achieved. You got to be humble to be able to say, what you do in your life would, in the eyes of majority, would be outstanding, right? In terms of standards.
I hope so. I hope so.
100%, I guarantee.
Yeah.
But we do get kind of, I think we do get kind of numbed by the
it's
day.
Just another day at work. Yeah, it's just another day at work. Yeah. But then you go home, and it's a new game, right? And that there you're learning to up your level. It's like working out a new muscle, right? And you're just, you're just, it's important. But I guess, like, so here's my style, right? Especially now. So I've just really defined the areas of my life that I have to work on, and more try and stick to those. So there's family, there's relationships, which includes family and friends, and I literally have it like in a mind map, like who are the friends that I want our family to be really close to, like your family, of course, and then people I'm in business with, people that, like with us, right? We can sit in a coffee shop and talk for hours. If we don't watch it, they'll be like, we killed the afternoon or something. So who are those people in my life that just like the way they live like resonates with me, and I would love my kid to grow up with their kids and stuff like that, right? So that's mapped out, and I guess in a way that was like setting standards for my relationships.
Sure.
In a way that I probably was a little bit more reckless when I was younger, and then the other part is with work, and work to me is, I really defined it as the activities I do that create and capture value. And since I can't really do a lot, what are the activities that create the most value and capture the most value? And so that's kind of like become a standard, like looking at it, value, not necessarily just financially, but in terms of impact, and in terms of joy, the joy that it generates, the energy that it generates for myself. And then the third one is really for myself, which is like for my body, soul, and spirit. What are the activities that have the highest impact? Because I can't do every, like some people go, oh, I'm getting into so like parkour, like when they're jumping. I'm like, I'm 36, man. I'm not about to jump through windows, right? It's like so I've been doing a lot of resistance bands, and literally what I do with every area of my life is I look for guys like Bill Gates, Michael Jordan. I look for guys that like who are the gold standards for these areas.
Yeah.
And what can I learn from them? And what it quickly shows me is it just shows me this huge gap between who I am now and who I can be.
Yeah.
Which I think is both, it's very humbling, which is important. And I think a lot of people just go like, hey, like their ego can't handle that gap. And they're like, no, I'm okay. I'm not so bad. But then you combine that gap with your dreams, particularly for, let's say, the people you care about. Yeah. And if I can become this person or closer to this kind of person, then for example, my son gets a less grouchy dad, right? Like, or a less workaholic of a dad. Or if I become this type of person, like, me, I'm like I'm great at the office, I'm bad everywhere else, I guess. But this year, if I had changed a few things, I'm pretty tactless, right? If I learn how to like be more gentle, then my wife's actually like responding even better, in the sense, because she's a very gentle, very sensitive soul, right? So all of those things, and I look like who's good at that, right? Like, and I look at gold standards outside my traditional standards, right? Outside the traditional, let's say, religious community I grew up with, outside the business community I grew up with, outside, let's say, the relationships, and you learn a lot in the process. So I think like being able to be very deliberate about what those are, and then being able to be honest about, that's a huge gap. You think about like you and Bill Gates, right? I mean, you're just a few $1 billion away from each other, right? It's not that big a gap, Just gotta start a tech company.
And I think you made a really good point. Like this is I guess the first step is identifying, right? It's like that process of identifying what is possible, and then being humble enough to really dig inside and say, where am I at today, and what's stopping me from being great in my relationships, being great in business, being great at being able to create financial freedom, being great at losing weight and having a physique and having energy. So that, that makes sense that's kind of that first step, right? Be inspired, find that realm of possibility, have a reference point for what that standard is. I guess for the audience, and not saying that, because I think we're always leveling up our standards, right? But I think there's a lot of people that live with low standards. And I think, people that are listening to this will probably, be able to start to ask themselves good questions, and are probably getting some good ideas as to how to start to identify, where they're at and where they want to go. But the next step is, and the next question is, well, how do you start to level up your standards? And this is really, it is an individual, personal journey, right? Because it is going from a habitual way of doing things and a way of thinking to breaking out of that mold. So what are some of the habits that you have that, I guess, support your standards and push yourself to, expand yourself and extend yourself further. Because once you get to a certain milestone, it's always about pushing that limit to the next standard, right? So what are some of the habits that you have? Because I mean, what I've noticed by just being around people that have high standards, there are some pretty key habits and rituals that people have in their life that really allow them to strengthen the muscle, right? Strengthen the muscle, up their game, and operate at a different level. So be keen to understand what some of those habits are for you, and also maybe some of that thought process around how you work towards leveling up.
I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned habit, right? When you look at the lives of high performers, like when you read about them, their lives are actually quite boring. It seems to be like like Warren Buffett, when he talks about his life, he'll be like, yeah, I sit down and read all day, right? He'll be like if you read as much as me, then you'd probably get my results. You sometimes we have this like kind of like this caricature of this, movie Wall Street, that like play hard and then like party hard. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people can make money that way, but at least for the guys that I believe like are super high performers and have done it sustainably, like you look like guys like Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, or at least back when they were playing, right? There's actually an extraordinary level of discipline, right? Not perfect people, but just an extraordinary discipline to master whatever their craft is. So I think one is, some of these things may not be habits, but maybe kind of like paradigms. So I think the first thing is what you said about nothing's impossible. I don't know how many times you're trying to tell someone to do better, and they're kind of like they've limited themselves. They haven't even tried.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't have this, or
Yeah.
I'm not like this. I've never done this before. And so one of the stories I remind myself, and I remind my teams, is like if a 10-year-old boy went back in time and met up with Magellan, the guy who landed in the Philippines and discovered it for Spain, right? He could tell Magellan, I can do what you did in one day. Right? It took him over a year to get here, or over 100 days, that's for sure. And now a 10-year-old boy can do it. And Magellan, who was the #1 explorer in that place, will be like, how are you going to do it? And then the boy will be like, I'll ride an airplane. And Magellan will be like, what's an airplane? Well, it's a flying machine. What's a flying machine? Is it like a bird? No, it's a machine. It's mechanical. And be like, okay, how does it fly? Does it flap its wings? No, it doesn't flap its wings. It's fixed. And how does it fly? Well, it has engines. What's an engine? Oh, an engine is this machine where you burn fuel, creates energy. The energy gets the wheels going, gets it fast enough. You get, and then so the aerodynamics. And Magellan's like looking at this kid like, what are you smoking, right? And the #1 explorer, the #1 like expert on the seas and all of that, he's gonna think this kid is crazy. But us, with the benefit of hindsight, know that kid's not crazy. He's just describing a future that, and the idea gets even more amazing when he starts saying like, well, what's fuel? Well, fuel is this liquid you suck up from the ground, you refine it and heat it, and then they're like, what? He goes, in fact, when I'm bored, I watch a video on the plane. And he's like, what's a video? Well, a video is kind of like you have an actor, an actress. He goes, that must be a big plane. You have a whole theater in the plane, because his idea of actor, actress is like a theater, right? And he'd be like, no, they're on video. What's a video? And then he'll be like, oh, well, you can shrink people. So he'll never understand what the kid is saying, but we all know that it's not impossible. It's actually things we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. Like this video, right? We're literally sending data into space. It's landing, in my iPad in Manila. Didn't get lost in space. Didn't, it's amazing, right? And so when you think about all of the things that's been accomplished that we enjoy, and that everyone, like anyone who ever takes a digital photo, should be reminded that nothing's impossible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You send it to your mom, it literally went to space, back down wherever she is, right, in real time. And then you'll be like, oh no, I've never been a morning person. I'm like, what? What's harder? Putting an alarm clock or sending like billions of data packets to space, right? It's like, and making its way back in one piece.
Yeah.
I just don't get that kind of thinking, you know. It's like, yeah. So I think that's one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we take these things for granted, right? And I think this comes back to, you made a point earlier. It's our environment. I mean, we become numb to what is our minimum level standard, and that becomes kind of where our comfort zone is, where we don't really think about what's had to actually happen, who's had to innovate, who's had to
Yep.
expand their standards, who's had to, you know, step up and actually create. And I think this is such an important topic, because when we talk about, you know, when we talk about this idea of standards, there is no doubt in my mind that there is a significant portion of the population that needs to up their standards. I mean, if we
Well,
look
yeah,
at,
just come to Manila.
and worldwide, if you look at, I mean, if you look at just what's an indicator of your standards, let's talk about financial. Okay. So your bank balance is probably a clear indication of what your standards are, right? And, you know, since getting into business and, you know, the economics, sure, there's there's some nice luxuries to it. And when you get to a certain level of comfort, you look back and you look at, well, what drives me now? But I speak to a lot of people that are still working their corporate careers, or trying to do something for themselves, and they haven't nailed it they haven't nailed the idea or the concept of actually creating financial freedom. And this is
Yeah.
it's such an emotional, personal topic, right? Money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well,
you know,
standards
money.
are anything with some sort of measuring and saying like, how good are you? Um, I think people don't want to be judged, right? And I think that's why you're right in saying it's a personal thing. And I think that's why judging yourself, when your standards for yourself are so high, you kind of
Yeah.
become a bit immune to other people's judgments. Because no matter how much they kind of criticize you, you're very clear about what you're after. And you're probably like, yeah, okay, sorry to fail you. I failed myself, right? It's like, next, you know, it's not that big a deal. But I agree with you.
You have so
Yeah.
many people that that complain. They complain about their situation. They complain about their financial situation. They don't have enough money to go on holidays. They don't have enough money to, you know, enjoy the pleasures in life. And, you know, for me, the question is, well, what's stopping you? What is stopping you? And for me, it comes all back down to standards. So, you know, what stops people from leveling up their standards?
That's a good question. Like some, I think sometimes people just aren't taught that you got to level up, you know, and they're taught to like, hey, follow this formula and you'll be happy or something
Environment.
like that. Yeah. So that's, I think I feel worse for those that have the chance to, you know, that have the resources to, have the flexibility to, and are trapped by their own. So I wrote an article before, wasn't the most popular one, but I mean, popular in the sense that a lot of people felt offended by it, right? And so I wrote like, here are some of the things that hold people back, right?
Yeah, sure.
It was like 6 things, but I don't. And I think the first one was entitlement, right? And so the challenge with standards is like, you see someone with a higher standard or enjoying, let's just say a certain standard of living, right? Entitlement means that you should have that standard, but you don't necessarily have to earn it. And so sometimes you look at someone else who didn't earn it and you're like, what a lucky person, right? Didn't have to earn it, now they have it. And like, there are lucky people, but it doesn't mean that just because someone else was lucky that you're entitled to be lucky in that way, you know? So I think that, so for example, I was talking to this class once and we were talking about housing, and I asked them, should everyone have a house? Right? And then they were like, yes. Every single one of them said yes. And I said, okay, what kind of house? With a pool, 3 bedrooms, you know, how many bathrooms? Should it have internet? Should it have cable? And, you know, first they'd be like, yeah, it should have more than one room. Yeah. And then you start going down the list, right? Like, should it have a 2-car garage, 3-car garage, 10-car garage? And everyone's like kind of like getting confused. I said, well, yeah, because the idea of everyone having a house sounds good, but when you start saying that everyone has to be given a house, we can't even agree on what kind of house that is. And this is a class of 40. You know, what happens when you go to like 4 billion? You know, so I think entitlement kind of like, no, I should get it because someone else got it good. You know, the other one I think is vanity, and vanity is kind of like, I want to look, I like looking like I made it is more important than going through the grind of making it. I don't want to look like I'm struggling. I don't want to look like I'm having a hard time. And that's why I like self-effacing people, because they've found that they're like, I don't have to look good or, you know, or better. Like this is it, right? But then but at the same time working hard towards that higher standard.
Yeah.
So I appreciate people who appreciate the journey, right? Where they set a really crazy goal and they go after it, even if they're not necessarily achieving it right away. But a lot of people are like, no, I wanna look glamorous. I wanna look like I can afford the car I can't afford. You know, I want to look like I can afford the suits I can't afford. And so that, but the thing is, the word vanity means empty. A lot of people don't realize that. That's the literal like definition of that word. And so you look it, but you're empty. Not just from necessarily from a substance standard, but also from a satisfaction standpoint, right? Because there's no. And then the third one I put there was impatience, where people like aren't willing to you know, like you think about some of the standards we've placed on ourselves, right? Like I get impatient sometimes that I'm not as good as this gold standard. I'm like, wait a minute, this guy's been doing his whole life. I need to keep at it, right? Or I think about my life now and the things I have. I mean, like I have more than my parents did at this age, right? And they had 3 kids and they made it work and they're happy. And I'm like, and so it's like, why am I rushing? You know, something like that, right? So impatience, political correctness was one of the things I added. And political correctness is the idea that, which I think has a lot to do with standards also, in the sense that my feelings, right? And no one can, I can't say anything offensive. But to be honest, when I look at high performers and I benchmark against myself, it's offensive, right? It's like it hurts in the sense that, wow, you know, this person is younger than you and they're here, or this person is really a better father than you, or a better husband, or this person is, and here what we get is like, no, you're good, you know, you're good the way you are. I mean, I'm not saying you're bad. I'm just saying is that, you know, you could always up it, right? Everyone I think has like a certain intrinsic value, but not everyone has a certain kind of like cultivated value, and that's where standards come in, right? So I mean, this one, you know, just like someone from when I was younger, right? Let's say I'd be on a date, and let's say I'd be going out with someone, and one of the worst questions I dreaded was when they'd be like, "Do you think I'm fat?" Right? And so my standard answer was always like, because I always felt like I was put in a bad spot, right? I can't win this question, so I'd just be like, I don't know, why don't we get some calipers and jump on a weighing scale and let's figure it out, right? And then they would get extra mad, right? I'd be like, let's go check, right? What's your body fat percentage, or like get on a weighing scale. And I realized, you know, like people told me after was that they're not asking you what their weight is. They want you to just validate them. They're not literally asking you for an objective answer to, do you think I'm fat? And I think so that's kind of like a funny, like kind of real life experience. But then you see this in different areas of life, right? Like employees or let's say, you know, people in business who just want to be validated more than know, am I really a good businessman?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They want to be, am I really a good person? Am I really a good, let's say, partner? And what I mean by that is, am I really providing value? Am I really creating value? And so a lot of people are more validation oriented than value oriented. And that stops them, you know? And so, like, I don't know how it is with how you do it, but so one of the things I like to think about is, if I don't go after this standard, then my family, for example, gets a substandard, you know, or my employees get a substandard, or my shareholders get a substandard. And if I really care about them and say, no, I want them to have the best, then I shouldn't want to give them anything substandard. So that's another thing that kind of helps me from a mindset point of view.
I think that that idea of validation is really important because as you know, as you push towards persevering something, you look for
Encouragement, or
affirmation,
yeah.
right? You look for affirmation that you're doing something right because you know, and I look at like that question of what stops people from starting. You know, I feel there are so many underlying personal reasons, including this idea of fear, which we're obviously going through such a huge wave of fear across
Yeah.
the globe right now. But that idea of fear, you know, the number of times that, and this is not unique, everybody has that little voice in their head that you get a little point of inspiration and you start to push towards something. And then that little voice comes in your head and says, you know, what the hell are you doing? Why are you doing
Yeah.
this? You know,
Yeah.
you can't do that. You're not good enough. And so those external points of reference for validation, I think are really important in this whole journey of like leveling up your standards. But it's, I think it's the point at which you find that validation and the affirmation internally that really starts to see yourself accelerate and increase your standards. Because I feel that if you're always looking for external validation, you'll never find that level of internal certainty that you need to be grounded, to drive. You're always going to run out of fuel if you're looking external because they'll perish
Yep.
away. You know, they'll go
And
off,
most
do
people
something
don't want
else.
to go to your level, right? Most people don't want to wake up at an ungodly hour. Most people don't want to like work out or diet. I mean, most people don't want to have to do. Most people just want to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like, and so if you're expecting validation that leads to success from people like that, they're not going to encourage you towards, because your success in many ways makes other people uncomfortable, you know, because then, you know, if you were like, if you're the guy with abs, right, and you go in and everyone was like unhealthy and you're like, you know, not eating, like every time I'm with my fitter friends, I'm like, oh, look at this, you know, and then all of a sudden I feel like I need to work out more, right? Because I see them like, okay, that's a healthier body. I need to be more like that. But for someone that's looking for something better, right? That can be uncomfortable, you know, or for other people. So, but I think, so for me, this is gonna sound like every morning, especially during tough mornings, like during like COVID, right? Like literally the line I just repeat to myself. Did you ever watch Rocky where Mickey just tells him like, "Get up, you son of a bitch," right? That's it, right?
Yeah.
That's all I do, and I'm like, you know, and I just get up, you know,
Yeah.
and then and so people like, that's like that's your morning thing. I'm like, yeah, because
That's your
sometimes that's
habit.
what you need, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, but if I need to like take a 3 hour, you know, like phone call, you know, and but we actually really like that part because he goes, get up, you son of a bitch, because Mickey loves you, right? That's the line there, right? And then you
Yeah.
kind of think about who are all the people that are meaningful to me, and
Yeah.
so it kind of shows my age also, but that it can be as simple as that, right? You
Yeah.
don't necessarily need like a full blown life coach, you know. They're useful, like, so here, when a high performer gets a life coach, they become awesome, right? And so when a person who's not necessarily a high performer gets a life coach, I see mixed results, because I always tell people like, more than a life coach, you need a life. You need a reason to get up. You need a reason to exist, right? And that and for me, I think the exciting part is you get to design that for yourself.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, some people
So
are still
true.
waiting for someone to say, oh, I need someone to tell me what to do. I'm like, that's one of the funnest things about life. You get to make it up, you know, to an extent, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, but what if I'm wrong? I'm like I, you know, I'm willing to admit that most of us are making it up as we go along, right? And that's part of the
Yeah.
fun.
I think that that idea of a life coach is, I can relate to that. It's kind of, you know, where does the value of a life coach come in terms of driving standards? It's frameworks, it's thought provoking. It's, you
Yeah,
know, the utility
systems
is
and
there
like,
to create the right kind of train of thought to move in the right direction. And I can relate to that. I mean, like, you know, starting the business in the Philippines, at that point, I didn't really have a frame of reference, but through the process, I started to, you know, not have direct life coaches, but kind of indirect that I would take.
That you sourced yourself. Yeah.
I sourced myself. But an interesting point you just made is I call it kind of like the push and pull theory, right? It's like you can either be pushing yourself up a hill and you can be pushing to an outcome, which is very exhausting. And I think at a certain point you end up burning out.
Yeah.
Or you can be pulled by something that is much greater, right? And I think that's a really important point that probably most people, once they get to a certain level of success where they don't need a life coach with frameworks and, you know, thought-provoking ideas, they start to really question internally, why am I doing what I'm doing? And some of those really meaningful questions become a lot more clear that create that pull. So, and I know you're extremely purpose focused in your business and things that you do in your life, just based on, you know, our conversations, but be good to understand, you know, how that plays a role in your life. Like what is the purpose? What pulls you every day in what you do, both in business and just in your personal life?
A kid that never stops eating, man. Dude, a kid that nonstop.
That'll do it.
I think I'm trying to put a framework also to like even my own thoughts, but I think at the start, I would say it's really necessity. And I think I think it's an important stage in a person's life, and that's the stage where they learn how to respond and be independent and all of that. And some people are looking for a sexy reason at the start. Sometimes it's, you know, I want to be independent and be able to take care of myself, right? And be able to allow people to depend on me. And then I think people go through this stage of discovery where you kind of discover your strengths. You know, you kind of discover what you enjoy, what's meaningful to you, what's not. And then you go, and I think this is where a lot of people get stuck, is they never make that transition to mastery, where they're forever dabbling, right? They're forever like starting new things. You know, they jump from, you know, like from Taibo to, you know, like bar to Zumba. And, you know, people who've been doing some of those things for years are now fitter than the person who just jumped and jumped and jumped and jumped. You know, like people who've been doing Tai Chi are fitter than, you know, some of these, you know, like that thing's ancient. But I think they never make that transition to mastery where everything they've learned about themselves, Carl Jung has this term individuation, where they take all these different, you know, positive, negative, like all these rich experiences, and are able to integrate it into this very original character, into the different things they do about their life, right? Where, you know, it's a difference between, let's say, just an accountant and a CFO. You know, like a good CFO is like, you know, or really good finance people, like some of these PE guys or VC guys. Like let's say every time I listen to Charles and Vic, I pick something up, you know, like, and so something like that, right? And then after, ideally, you switch from mastery to legacy, where you're able to give back, right, and things like that. So I think a lot of people who skip the necessity stage, maybe they had too much money or someone always like just provided the bills or all of that. I feel sorry for them, because that is, for me, where you really build your foundational confidence, where you know, whatever happens, you'll survive. Whatever happens, you'll find a way. You learn that in that stage, right? And then when you go to discovery, so some people are trying to get to discovery and skipping necessity, and they're wondering why it keeps crumbling, because they don't have that foundational confidence, you know, or that and you get that not from just someone external validating you, but to you proving to yourself, as you know, said, like this internal confidence that I can do it. You know, I've proven it over and over and over again, right? And so that's why I think this COVID thing is a blessing for many people, because it brings a lot of us back to necessity. It brings us back to, you know, like, oh, you thought you're gonna coast this year, right? Which is kind of like my dream, right? But and then now you're back to, you know, fighting every day, which I think is a blessing, right? So but I think that's something that people need to go back to and just appreciate what that is. Like
Yeah.
learning how to survive and proving to yourself that you did better today, you did better tomorrow, you do better every day, is what builds confidence, in my opinion, more than, let's say, someone external telling you, oh, you're good, oh, you're hot, oh, you're
Yeah.
hot, or you're hot. Especially on social media, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the emptiest one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how
Yeah.
I see it. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, man, thanks for the time. I have one last question, I guess, to close things off. For anybody that's listening that wants more in their life in any area, physical, financial, personal, spiritual, what would be your, I guess, one piece of advice or thought on how to start increasing their standards?
One piece. I think think about, like in business, you always should think about your customer, right? What value what you're doing brings to your customer. And so I guess similarly, it would be something like, think about the people you love, think about the people you care about. And this always forces me to change course or adjust myself. Always, I can't go through this exercise without correcting something in my life, right? And you think about, what is the benefit if you were to be that better person, right? And this could be yourself, right? It could be, no, I love myself. What would the benefit be to me if I read, let's say a book a month or a page a day, right? What would the benefit be? And then also think about, what would I lose, or what would that loved one lose if I don't start today, right?
Yeah.
So for example, when I feel like just being a bum, right? Like, and I ask myself, like, what do I gain by not being a bum, right? And then, like, what do I lose by being a bum, like for a day, a week? Or there are days where, you're like, we get emotional also, right? You feel like stressed, or you feel like, what do I gain by if I overcome this right now and force myself, even if I don't feel like it? What do I lose? Like my son seeing me like being this like daddy monster at home, right? Or let's say my team seeing me, what kind of fear am I infusing to, in my company or my loved ones, or what kind of stress am I putting into my body? And so I guess that would be my one thing, right? Like, think about the people you care about, including yourself, and think about what you gain, right, by starting now and upping the standard and going through that difficult journey, and think about what you lose if you don't. So I guess that would be like the one thing.
Cool. Hey, David, thank you. It's been a good hour, although it seems like it's been a couple minutes. Appreciate you.
Fast.
Thanks for the time. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.